Okay, good evening, sisters, brothers, friends. We're going to get started now. Thank you all for joining us on this Zoom meeting. We're getting used to Zoom, and it never is the same as being in the same room together, but it is a community that we're continuing. I think you'll find this a very interesting agenda tonight. We are going to ask everybody to mute your phone unless you're being recognized to speak. The roll call of officers is taken through this rather than reading it out. Jennifer, could you read the harassment statement, please?
Yes. Mutual respect, cooperation, and understanding are strongly held principles of the trade union movement. We will neither condone nor tolerate harassing or discriminatory behavior that creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment and undermines the dignity or self-esteem of any individual. An injury to one is an injury to all. Speech or conduct which is racist, sexist, homophobic, or discriminatory in any way is unacceptable to trade unions and only serves to divide us. Our policies and practices must reflect this commitment to equality as we work together for justice and dignity in our workplaces, our unions, and our communities.
Thanks very much. And I guess a lot of us looking at the fiasco south of the border would wish that many more people in the political spectrum in the States would respect that statement rather than do what they do. You know, we are gathered each month in this place on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And it became the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Covenant between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat that committed them to live in peace on this land and asked all who came after to respect that. And we hope that we are all understanding the dynamics of the relations of Indigenous people and those whose families have come since. The minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated, and it was circulated in an attachment to the email that I went out to you as delegates. If there's any errors or omissions? Saying none, who is going to take this vote?
Jennifer is doing the polling.
Thank you. And do you want to explain how this works for people that may be first-time delegates?
Yeah, if you haven't been in the delegates meetings before, if you're online, you will see in front of you the motion. Do you support the question? Do you support the motion? And you can choose yes, no, or abstain. There isn't a way for people on the phone to do this, except if you felt strongly about it once the voting is cast, then you could unmute yourself and say that you voted against it. And we wait a certain length of time to make sure that we've given enough time for people to cast their vote. And then Jennifer will say very soon, I'll give you, a couple more seconds, and then we'll close it down and show you the results of the vote.
Thanks.
I'll give it 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to end it. So
and I'm just checking to see if Kumsa Baker is on the line somewhere. Is Kumsa on?
Yeah, I'm on.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, that motion's passed. Some of us were shocked some weeks ago when we saw a headline about a senseless murder that took place in the west end of the city. And the victim, who was shot in front of his family, was a young man who was a member of the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 353, Hamdi Zachary. Hamdi is somebody who Kumsa Baker, who is the outreach coordinator with the Toronto Community Benefits Network, has known for many years. And we wanted to ask Kumsa to maybe talk for a minute or two about Hamdi before we observe a minute's silence. Kumsa?
Yeah, thank you, John, for creating the space to share a little bit more about Hamdi. Hamdi is actually a childhood friend of mine, and growing up here in the east end of Toronto. And he was a really great family person. He grew up to, love the trade of the electrical trade, and that was kind of since high school. His big dream was to, become eventually a foreman on a construction site in the electrical field. And over the past few years, he's really, taken that passion and given it back to his community. And so, it's a really tragic incident that happened in front of his family. He leaves behind 3 brothers, as well as his mom and his father, as well as his wife, as well as his newborn baby. And it's been a big shock to the wider community, for people that knew him, in the community, in his workplace, some of his colleagues at the Toronto Community Benefits Network, where Hamdi was also a mentor as part of the Next Gen Builders Mentorship Program. And helping other Black youth also find a pathway into the electrical trade, and that was kind of his passion, was to really create an opportunity for others to join him in that trade. And so it's still a shock to many, and I hope everyone can keep him in your thoughts and prayers this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Kumsa. Can we just each take a moment of silence in the memory of Brother Zachariah? Thank you. We have a credential report from either Doug or David.
I see Doug on the call, so I was just waiting to see if he's going on. Doug?
Yep. Yeah, just getting the credential report up. Okay. I move Thursday, November 5th, 2020, the following. QP Local 2181, 1 delegate. QP Local 3903, 5 delegates. OPSU Local 528, 2 delegates. OPSU Local 562, 3 delegates. Sheet Metal Local 30, 1 delegate. YUFA 8 delegates. I so move.
Thanks, Doug. So that's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, if you can put the vote up. We'll do that. Thanks, Doug, for doing that. And while we're tabulating that vote, Susan McMurray is going to introduce our speaker from the States, somebody that she has met through union education, a brother who's a leader of the Illinois Teachers Union. And, we're just voting for a second. Susan, do you want to talk about Brother Arnoldo Fabela?
Thank you. Yes, I'm really pleased to introduce Arnoldo Fabela, Director of Organizing and Field Activities for the Illinois Federation of Teachers. I had the great pleasure and honor of spending 3 weeks with Arnoldo and a number of other labor leaders in the U.S. last year through the Labor Leadership Initiative. The Illinois Federation of Teachers is a really interesting organization because they organize more than teachers. They go much broader than that. Arnoldo himself is knowledgeable and skilled, not simply as an organizer, but as you're going to hear from him tonight, also as a political person, someone who does political bargaining as well as collective bargaining. So I'm going to turn it over to Arnoldo and ask him to unmute himself. We are going to have time after Arnoldo is finished. He's going to be talking about the US elections, predominantly the presidential elections, but of course there are Senate races and House races as well that are going on. So Arnoldo, over to you. Thank you very much for being with us here tonight, brother, from Chicago.
Anytime, Susan. Yeah, it was an honor to spend those 3 weeks with you last year, and not just share what we're doing here, but to learn about all the things that are happening just north of the border. And just to shout out to any delegates that might be on from the CWA this evening. We're currently attempting to do a cross-border organizing campaign where we're organizing a group of workers in Chicago and Los Angeles while we're working with the CWA to organize the workers of the same employer in Toronto. So it's exciting, and I think there'll be more news to come in the weeks ahead. So as Susan mentioned, I worked for the Illinois Federation of Teachers, and I'm originally from Illinois as well. I've been in the labor movement for about 20 years, a little bit under 20 years. Illinois is home, and it truly is the crossroads of America. For those of you who've been to Chicago, you might have noticed how many bridges, how many rail lines there are, and there's even canals that connect the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River. Chicago is also the home of the labor movement, the American labor movement. There are more local ones of various international unions in Chicago than in any other city in the United States. A little bit just about us, the Illinois Federation of Teachers. We have about 100,000 members across the large geography that is Illinois, from Lake Michigan to the Mississippi River, from Chicago, Illinois to Cairo, Illinois, which is at the bottom of the state where the Mississippi River and the Ohio River meet. We represent workers predominantly in K through 12 settings, but we also represent workers in higher education, state employees. Here in Illinois and in the United States, there are more privatized services when it comes to schools and public service. So we also have, forayed into organizing private sector workers. Here we have charter schools, and we've been able to successfully organize almost 1,000 workers in that regard. And we've been looking at what we call cultural workers as well, people who work for institutions and that are generally nonprofits, but have been around for a long time and offer some value to the communities around. So Susan asked me this evening to talk just a little bit about, what was happening with labor and, Black and Brown communities organizing around the United States election. And I think, as most of you may know, the organizing has not finished because the race is not over yet. In fact, I wasted a little bit of time about an hour ago listening into Trump continue to peddle conspiracy theories and try to stir his base around, fears that the election is being stolen. It was just, this literally happened in the last 45 minutes, and it was absolutely depressing. Just to see that, he must know he's on the way out, and he's decided to drag with him the entire country. This scorched earth approach is, definitely sowing a lot of distrust in our election systems. And I've been saying that, while it looks like we might end up defeating Trump in the next few days, Trumpism is going to live on. I think for a long time, I was of the belief, along with lots of progressives, that all we needed to do was just, wait our time, and enough racists would die off, and we would be able to, change this country. I was looking at some just horrifying statistics today from exit polling that show that among young voters, so ages 18 to 29, 42% of white youth voted for Trump. It wasn't too long ago, maybe in the last year or two, that when you would run similar polls, it would show that, sizable portion of youth were open to ideas around even socialism. So just to see how caustic the environment here has become just in the last couple of years is, rather depressing. I do want to say that, it looks like Pennsylvania votes will come in tonight, and they will, go to Joe Biden. Things are looking better in Georgia. Arizona seems to be hanging on, Nevada as well, like all these, swing states that have emerged this time around. In all of that, I think it is positive, but, in response, there has been, a reaction, and there was rallies overnight and even today of Trump supporters. And it's, understandable why they are coming out. It wasn't too long ago, and just earlier last month, that we're, during a debate, Donald Trump told a white nationalist group called the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. So in many ways, what we're starting to see might just be the surface of those individuals standing by and starting to come out. And it's unfortunate because of all these locations where people are right now doing the hard work of just, ensuring votes are properly counted, and making sure people trust democratic institutions are predominantly African-American communities and Latino communities. And they, she spent this evening just raising suspicions of fraud and that it's being, committed in these communities. Even here in a place like Illinois, which is a strong Democratic stronghold, it's, it's probably been 30 years since we voted for a Republican president. Even here, we saw losses. We had a big progressive tax amendment on the ballot where we were going to hopefully solve decades of inequity and insolvency by, passing a progressive tax, a graduated income tax, and it was soundly defeated by the forces on the right. We lost some seats in our legislature. We do think that we still have, at least in our state legislature, a supermajority, which allows us to be able to do some things. But we do know that we lost a Supreme Court justice, which may end up swinging any cases that come up through our state courts. It could be going to a court that's going to now be majority Republican, even though we are a Democratic state. And even just 2 years ago, we were able to take back or take over two congressional districts that had been historically red, had been historically Republican. As a part of the blue wave in 2018, we were able to secure 2 seats here in our suburbs. As part of just a kind of a demographic shift that was happening around suburbs in all the United States. And even in those races, like we're seeing, really tight races. In fact, one of them is they're still counting votes that were coming in. So, I think this impact of what we saw nationally, I think it's just continuing to solidify a lot of the divisions that have always existed here. A lot's been made by scholars about something they call the Obama-Trump counties. So these are, parts of the United States that voted in 2008 and even in 2012 for President Obama. And a lot of them in just Rust Belt, industrial, Great Lakes area. And, these were places that Trump in 2016 was able to take away from the Democrats. These were places that were, long storied strongholds of, the labor movement. It's interesting, and obviously data is still coming back right now, but when you look at the map, it doesn't look like Biden flipped any of them back. If anything, we were able just to expand the number of people that are voting in highly Democratic areas, but it also meant that Trump was able to increase his turnout in highly Republican areas. And it just highlights just how divided this country really is. I was reading recently about just the conservationist movement and, learning about fragmented habitats and how destructive it can be. And I just wonder if that same thing doesn't happen in, human societies. If you're only around people that are going to end up enforcing the things that you believe and you never hear anything different, that can't be good. And it's going to have devastating effects, unfortunately, I believe, for a while. And I guess the last thing, and I know we're not, in terms of just being doom and gloom right now, just we're not alone in this in the United States, but just, seeing how this misinformation can be weaponized in this moment. And it was just unparalleled. Not only, what I described earlier, we're somewhat segregated and divided already, but, a lot of that's just happening online in places like Facebook and Twitter, where people are ending up just kind of hearing from the same silos of information, the same information over and over again. For those who haven't seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, highly recommend it, and be prepared to be a little scared as well if you're online. So I guess this was just a way of kind of setting up, just the thing that Susan and John had asked me to talk about, which was just what was the work that we were trying to do here in the United States, progressive communities, the labor movement, communities of color in this moment. And I would say, looking at the results right now, I mean, there's things that we did well, and there's things that we didn't do so well that we continue to struggle with. I'll start off with labor first. I do think that we found new pathways for participation like never before through this election. In the past, we were so used to just and accustomed to the traditional knocking on doors and, showing up, at candidates' offices to put out yard signs and showing up to polling places. Because of the pandemic that's just roaring around us right now, a lot of the campaigns have to shift their thinking around that. And, I think I saw some of that happening even in 2016 and 2018, where political campaigns were willing to try doing things like peer-to-peer texting, et cetera. but labor usually doesn't go quickly. And because of a pandemic, it really did force us to kind of throw our playbook out the window and say, we need to figure out different ways of engaging. And, you know, just as an example, in the 3 weeks leading up to the election, I was able to participate in a bunch of phone banks where I joined other activists on Zoom just like this, got a quick training, and then was put on a virtual dialer. And I think from my count, I called swing state voters in up to 7 states just in those 3 weeks. And I would say that the other thing that, you know, we started doing earlier on and not waiting was starting to prepare for the possibility of some disruption post-election. So there's been lots of tables, lots of unions that have been talking now for weeks about what happens if Trump tries to stop the count, tries to you know, take this to a Supreme Court or to other courts, and then tries to steal the election that way. And even yesterday, we did see some, you know, initial mobilizations to, you know, coming out of that work, you know, followed by stuff that we're planning for Saturday, November 7th. What we didn't do so well, I'll just be real quickly, is, you know, we still struggle to persuade our own membership around the core values that I think a lot of us as unionists hold. 40% of union members voted for Trump once again, and this is coming from early exit polling. This number is the same as 2016, and the fact that we were not able to move the dial, considering a pandemic and the huge disruption to our economy, is something that we should be really concerned about as a U.S. labor movement. And it probably just shows just how little work we're doing in trying to persuade our members around issues that are broader than just bread and butter. In the Brown community, Latinx community, which I come from, I think there was some work that was well done in just continuing to cultivate growing demographics in places like Arizona and Texas. And Arizona does seem to be a bright spot in this moment. In Texas, you know, there was just, you know, another election cycle where it was this hope that it was going to be a state that would finally go blue, because there are people that believe once that happens, like, we actually might see the elimination of the Electoral College, because at some point the number of states voting for Democrats will be so big that the Republicans will never have a chance. But it wasn't this time around. But I would say that, and I don't know if this is as much, you know, things that didn't go well from the Latinx community, but just, I would say it's maybe the way that we approach the Latinx community, in that this time around, we did see more defection. And I think it's a mistake when we look at any, you know, minority group and just try to treat it as a monolith and just take it for granted. And I think there is a story there, a lesson there for Democrats, that there is work that still remains. Trump did better nationally with Latinos this election than he did the last. And it wasn't just in Florida, even though that's been a good example. The one that was used quite a bit on Tuesday night. And, you know, it's easy to blame Cuban expatriates, you know, for that loss, but there were also other waves of immigrants that, you know, voted against their own interests and voted for Trump. And some of them are coming with, you know, their own experiences from their own countries with, you know, political movements that have been defined as socialist, but, you know, one might argue are really not. You know, but there's also, you know, a lot of religious, you know, beliefs that are, you know, really like well ingrained. And I would also say that, you know, people that come from Latin American countries, we have our own tortured history when it comes to the colonialist mindset, and when it comes to even, you know, issues around racism. Colorism is something that abounds in our community, and it's something that, you know, we can't ignore. If I could say that there's any community that knocked it out of the ballpark, it was our Black and brothers and sisters, the Black community. And, you know, it's unfortunate that it is the people who have suffered the most through our systems of oppression that we continue to ask to be the ones to save us from ourselves over and over again. But, you know, the groundswell that started in Minneapolis with the murder of George Floyd, you know, just kind of mushroomed this summer. And, you know, the Black Lives Matter, you know, became more than just a movement of a moment, but they actually put the work in. You know, the victories that we saw in Wisconsin this election cycle were due to the work that Black activists and organizers did in Milwaukee. The victory that happened in Michigan, similar work being done by folks in Detroit on the ground. And the likely victories that seem to be presenting themselves this evening in Pennsylvania and Georgia, similarly, hard work that people have been doing now for quite a while in Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. So, you know, it's a testament to, you know, things can still happen, but it does take a lot of just hard work and, you know, just a reminder for us. So I would just say in closing, before I think I've probably gone over time. Sorry, Susan and John. I would imagine you might be feeling pessimistic from what I've shared. And I think there is a little bit of that I'm feeling, that even with Joe's victory, it's not clear if he's going to have the mandate. It doesn't look very good for the Senate. It looks like the Republicans will hold control. The Democrats will hold control of the Congress, House of Representatives, but they did lose some seats along the way. So I think it will lead to leadership being a little bit more cautious about the things that they'll want to fight for. But I would say if there's anything that I'm just hoping allows us to continue pushing for the transformations that we need, it's the moment that we're in with COVID. Unlike other leadership transitions that have happened in the past, where it could be easy for a newly elected leader to ignore the demands and the promises that were made in the past, COVID is going to make it very difficult for anyone to forget what's happening on the streets and in hospitals around the country. And I think it does create the opportunity for us to continue lifting up the things that COVID has made very apparent when it comes to who dies from it, who's being impacted economically by it, the devastation that's happening in communities. I mean, even when it comes to the world that I know, which comes, school funding in schools, right now we have a system set up because of the Trump administration where every single local school district is trying to figure out a response to a global pandemic and not getting any kind of advice or guidance from above. And I think that is an opportunity for us to just kind of get people angry and motivated to be able to get out. I think it's just an opportunity for us to not to return to the past, but to really just push for a new vision of the future that we should have. And for sure, I think we've seen it in the awakening that's happening in certain communities. So I'll pause there and take questions.
Thank you so much, Arnoldo. You've given us a lot of food for thought, certainly about what some of the challenges that we'll see in the future, but things that we can think about as we're campaigning here in different elections under these unusual circumstances. I think we have about 5 minutes for some Q&A. There's one question that came in through the chat. One person has their hand up. I would invite others, if you have a question, to open the participant list, and you'll see a little blue hand that will allow you to raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, you can push *9. What I'm going to do is I'll ask people to ask their questions, and then perhaps Arnoldo can craft an answer that can respond to a number of them. And I would ask you, because of the time limits, to ask a question rather than making a statement. So the first question is from Judith Junup, who is with our Society of United Professionals. How can we help here in Canada? So that's the first question. I'm going to turn it over now to Donovan Rich and ask him to unmute himself.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Arnoldo, for the presentation and all the hard work that you're doing down there. Organizing teachers is in charter schools certainly is a big task. I think for future working class struggle there. Obviously, some of the more exploited workers certainly in down there. So keep up that work. And I guess my question for you is seeing as how Bernie Sanders came a close second in each of the last 2 elections, and in each case there were calls for Bernie to break from the Democrats and actually form a third party, a socialist party with connections to the labor movement. I think well, personally, I think this would have been a great idea, and I'm disappointed that he didn't do it. And I know that there were a lot of unions that were behind him, and each of his runs. And so, yeah, what do you think are the prospects going forward for the formation of a third party, of a labor party, a socialist party, or a combination of both? I think ultimately, because I think personally that we have to get out of the dead end of lesser evilism, because otherwise we're just going to keep going back and forth between moderate Democrats and reactionary Republicans like Trump. And so that's my opinion, but I'd like to hear what you think. Thank you.
Thank you.
No question. Oh, sorry.
And then there's another question in the chat. What do you wish you had known or wish you had done at the start of the election campaign? So why don't we start with those three, and then that may end up being all we have time for, unless we give special privileges to John Cartwright.
So I'll start off with the first one about just what can all of you do to help us in this moment that we're in. I think there will hopefully be some clarity soon enough about, you know, what these battles could look like in courts. But I am seeing some initial discussions happening in lots of spaces about, you know, us trying to target corporations that have, you know, really given lots of money to, you know, Republicans in some of these states. I think Comcast is one that, you know, has been identified. But, you know, I would say that there's probably more multinationals that have, you know, branches throughout, not just the United States and Canada, that could be interesting targets if we ever got to the place where we are trying to do some mass mobilization. I would say that the thing that all of you can do as leaders of the Toronto and York Labor Council, though, is just to continue leading and being an example for us in terms of what we can do. John and Susan shared with me earlier today your website, which I had a chance to peruse, and just see a lot of the platform that you've all been able to develop together around racial justice and, you know, the need for us to not just think of ourselves, but, you know, broader society. And, you know, those are discussions that are often very difficult to have, even inside of US labor movement spaces, because folks get really scared thinking that if we start talking about more than just what's in our contract, we could scare members off. And, you know, but to continue showing that, I mean, I'm a part of, you know, various CLCs here, and, you know, that's work that we're still trying to do in this moment, trying to be able to pass, you know, progressive and robust platforms that are there to secure the rights of not just, you know, certain segments, but, you know, everybody. I'll just jump to this question about, I think it was in the chat, right, about a vision, or what, you know, what I wish I'd known in advance of the election. You know, I think I should have been more cautious about believing these polling numbers. I think this is the second cycle where, you know, it's easy to read the polls that are coming out and make assumptions. And now it's two, you know, national election cycles in a row where they've been wrong. So it is, you know, probably not putting so much faith in that. Too often, I think in campaigns, you think that, you know, the polling is your cardinal point and you have to just kind of drive all of your work towards that. But I think what we need to shake ourselves out of is just, you know, maybe thinking that way and seeing it more as just a barometer of where people are at in this moment. I think a good example is that, you know, I've heard the story often about the 1960s civil rights movement and how unpopular Martin Luther King Jr. and civil rights were in that moment. And if, you know, progressive movements had been making decisions about, you know, what to do based off of what people in the public were saying, we probably would not have fought for civil rights. So it's more just thinking about, like, that's where people are at, and, like, but we need to figure out how we create a vision for where we need to get. And I think that became really clear to me with this referendum that we lost around a progressive income tax. It was the campaign that was driven was really focused on, you know, you can put a couple more dollars in your pocket if you're in the 97% of Illinoisans that's not going to have to pay more. And, you know, it maybe, you know, it's a way of thinking about just what, you know, how much money people will have in their pockets to buy groceries. But we had an opportunity to say, in this moment with this pandemic, we need money for schools. We need money for social services. We are taking a hit, and we didn't do it. So I think that would probably be another thing to also change for the future. And just to the last question I heard about this third party, yeah, there's been a lot of back and forth for, you know, years now. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Ralph Nader and, you know, what happened in 2000. I guess I would say these two things. One would be, if the Democratic Party isn't able to see that they kind of missed the mark with Latinos because they were not able to tap into that energy that that Bernie had really inspired, then it might be time, because it's only going to be the only way we're going to be able to kind of inspire, you know, I think a generation of Latinx activists and people in the community. I would also say, if this moment around COVID isn't enough to make us realize that we need a better and much more robust healthcare system, and, you know, we see the Democrats really folding on that, then it definitely might be time for us to move on and try to do something different. And then lastly, I would say, if we see a tepid approach by Joe Biden to just try to become friends with the Republicans, rather than really kind of standing up for principles. Sure, it might pass some initial legislation, but I do think it's going to have consequences come 2022 and 2024, when I think the vast majority of Americans are going to look around and say, okay, you may have passed a couple bills with fancy names, but I'm not seeing any changes in my day-to-day life. So I think that might create the opportunities, enough of a rupture to be able to create, I think, this vision that we're looking at.
Well, Arnaldo, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. I'm sure your life is just a crazy life at this point in time, with all of the calls on your time and energy. So for you to spend this time with us is fabulous. We really want to honor your work and the work of your colleagues there. The first time I was in Chicago was in 1981 at the Carpenters Union 100th anniversary, and there was a discussion on the floor in 1981 about labor having its own party. So this conversation is continuing a long time. But we're really happy that when we look at the squad and people like Ilhan from Minneapolis and the other sisters who have voice, that gives us hope as well. There's no substitute for hard work and for talking to members, and I think listening to members is the other point that comes out of this conversation. Sometimes we feel a little smug being north of the border and looking down, but I know how hard it is for activists like yourself and others who are really trying to, rebuild a labor movement, build it based on social justice, economic and racial and climate justice. So we just really want to thank you and wish you all the best, and let's all cross our fingers for the final results we're going to get tomorrow. And solidarity does go across all borders. We're an internationalist movement, and we want to thank you for everything you do around making this a better world. Thanks very much, Brother Arnoldo.
Solidarity to all of you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Arnoldo. Thank you.
And I guess we're all looking forward to seeing what the results are going to be. Now, we are going to have an election here in Toronto in January. People may have seen the news that in Scarborough Agincourt, Jim Karagiannis, who was a member of councillor, has finally exhausted his appeals, and he has been removed from office. A by-election is being held, and the Labour Council has been looking at this for quite a while. Mohammed Hashim, before he left, was paying a lot of attention. He was leading the city's file for us, and our municipal committee has met and decided to propose an endorsement. They took that to our executive board and unanimously bringing an endorsement recommendation to you tonight for the by-election in Scarborough Agincourt of Mana Wong. And I'm going to call on Lily Chang, the chair of the municipal committee, just to give you a little bit of background on that. Lily?
Thank you, John. So the municipal committee had a chance last week to speak with Mana Wong, and we heard about why she wants to run for city council and represent Scarborough Agincourt. Mana spoke from her experiences as a mother, as a worker, and as an immigrant who has came here 40 years ago and raised a family of 4 sons. Mana talked to us about how she is against privatization of public goods and opposes contracting out. She talked about the value of public services and how important they are to working families. She spoke particularly about the need for more frequent and affordable public transit. She mentioned to us about hours-long journey by public transit back and forth each day from her home in Scarborough to the ONDP constituency office in Toronto Danforth, where she worked. She also spoke about acknowledging the systemic racism existing in our society and about promoting equity and her desire to ensure that everyone in Scarborough has equal access to programs and services. Mana has been elected as a trustee for Scarborough Agincourt for 2 terms now, first in 2014 and again in 2018. And we think if elected, we would for the first time have a progressive councillor representing Scarborough and someone who reflects the demographics of the community as well. Mana has the endorsement from all of the Scarborough trustees as well as the chair of the board. That's pretty impressive. And the municipal committee moves to recommend that the delegates endorse Mana Wong for city council representing Scarborough Agincourt and asks that each member goes back to their local union to see how they can support Mana in this upcoming by-election.
Okay, that's a motion in front of us. I know there is one person that is going to be speaking on this, which is Felicia Samuel.
Thanks, John. Good evening, Labor Council fam. It is my pleasure to speak on behalf of Mana Wong. She is my friend. She's my neighbor. She lives very close to me here in Scarborough Agincourt, and she's been a true champion for public education. We've endorsed her each time that she has run for TDSB school trustee, and she's ready to represent us at this level municipally. When we think about the kind of politicians that we want people who are strong, who truly advocate for BIPOC, poor, working class people, someone who really listens and takes action. And I can tell you, it's been nice to be able to sit with Mana, whether it's at coffee shops or in my own living room. Imagine a politician in my living room, but talking about the issues that matter and knowing that she is there to work to move things forward. And Lily did a great introduction in terms of talking about Mana's strengths. But I have to tell you, we do need some good progressive politicians in Scarborough. I've already dedicated my time to Mana. I plan to be on her team. I will be donating and endorsing her. Supporting this motion to endorse her would be a really good thing that our delegation does tonight. So I'm really hoping that everybody will be on board in supporting this endorsement. We can't lose. She's an amazing candidate. She cares about us. She will protect our public services. And I hope to see some of you out there, if not all of you, out here in Scarborough Agincourt working on her campaign. Thank you.
Thanks, Felicia. Any more speakers before we go to a vote? Seeing none, we'll put up the vote on that motion. And while we're doing that, let me say that we've got over 5,400 union members that our affiliates are aware of in Scarborough Agincourt. And in a by-election in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of winter with mail-in ballots and probably a dozen candidates, this is going to be every vote will count. And so we are going to be asking every union to step up, to reach out to their members that live in Scarborough Agincourt, to recruit volunteers from all across, to staff up phone banks, to help us with people who know about digital campaigning, to come up and behind that, to have a Chinese Canadian leader, progressive leader standing up for our values from Scarborough. And I grew up in Scarborough, so the bellwether for me is always, can we have the true representation of working class values and politics, coming from Scarborough to City Hall or legislature? It's going to make a big difference. So please, if you want to volunteer, just send a note to campaigns@laborcouncil.ca. And I would give you Felicia's email directly, but I'm not going to do that because as a teacher, she's already overwhelmed. Campaigns@laborcouncil.ca, and we'll plug you into the campaign. So that is overwhelmingly endorsed, unanimous endorsement of those who voted. Thank you very much. And let's get on the campaign trail for Mana. The election is January the 15th. Thanks again. The next thing we have up is a wonderful, everybody here has heard of Naomi Klein. Well, her smarter brother's name is Seth Klein, and he's just written a book called A Good War, and it talks about what Canada did to confront the crisis facing it during the Second World War of fascism, and how we could draw lessons from that experience to defeat the climate emergency that's in front of us. But we hope Seth is on the line now, but we're going to start out by showing you a video that we did on climate justice. Can we run that video, please? Is somebody going to run the video?
We're here to march, and we're going to march for justice for all people, for Indigenous people. We're going to march for equal pay, for equal work. We're going to march to stand up for the climate, and we're going to stand up for the water. We're going to make this message known.
Toronto's labor movement has been fighting for economic justice, for social justice, for racial justice, and in the last 2 decades for climate justice as well. We have representatives here from all kinds of unions, from teachers, from public sector unions, healthcare workers, private sector unions, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, the Filipino Workers Network, our Community Benefits Network, that has negotiated jobs for racialized and indigenous youth, putting real jobs and climate together to make a future for communities.
Thanks. And I don't usually like having me featured in videos, but it just happened to be a speech that was captured against that backdrop of that wonderful march for jobs, justice, and climate. So Seth, I think you're on the line. And welcome from beautiful British Columbia, Seth Klein.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Nice to be with you. So thank you for this invitation, John. It's wonderful to be with you all. I'm coming to you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, otherwise known as Vancouver. John, just to check, you want me to talk a little bit about the book for 7 or 8 minutes or something like that?
Yeah, and then we'll have a couple of minutes for questions after that.
Great, great. Well, I really appreciate this invitation and a chance to tell you a little bit about the book. Here is the book, by the way. It's called A Good War, Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Emergency. I hope and I think that the book makes an important contribution to this moment, but also it calls on us to adopt an entirely new and different approach to the climate crisis than the one we've been pursuing to date. As the title suggests, I'm actually arguing and I'm convinced that to confront the climate emergency, a wartime approach is needed. And moreover, that our wartime experience should be embraced as a hopeful story. There's no small irony in me coming to this place, and like many of you, I'm sure I too wrestle with this war analogy. I actually cut my political teeth as a teenager in the peace and disarmament movement, and I am the child of Vietnam War resistors. That's indeed how I happen to be Canadian. But I am now strongly of the view that climate breakdown requires a new mindset to mobilize all of society, galvanize our politics, and fundamentally remake our economy. And my reason for saying so is that everything we've been doing to date is simply not working. If I were to show you a chart of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions going back the last 20 years, what you would simply see is basically a flat line. You know, it goes up and down a little bit, but basically the best we have managed to do so far is to simply flatline our emissions. They are not on a downward path, and we have run out the clock with these distracting debates about incremental changes, and where it matters most, actual GHG emissions, we have accomplished precious little. So I wrote this book last year. It was published in early September. The book project began as an exploration of how we can align our politics and economy in Canada with what the science says we urgently need to do to confront the climate emergency. The book is that. I had always planned originally to have a single chapter on lessons from the Second World War, because I'd always been intrigued by the wartime story as this interesting example of how we rapidly retooled the economy. But as I delved into that work, I began to see more and more parallels between our wartime experience and the current crisis, and ultimately decided to structure the entire book around lessons from Canada's Second World War experience. Again, not because I get all weirdly animated about war, but rather it's because I see in the history of our wartime experience this helpful and hopeful reminder that we have done this before. We have mobilized in common cause across society to confront an existential threat. And in the process, we retooled our entire economy, not once, but twice. Once to ramp up military production, another time to reconvert to peacetime, all in the space of 6 years. So the book explores what wartime scale mobilization could actually mean and look like. Each chapter is basically half history and half in the present. It jumps back and forth in time between stories of what Canada did in the war and what we now face. And in these comparisons, it answers questions like, how has public opinion rallied to support mobilization during the war? And how can we do that again? What was the role of government, the news media, arts and culture? How was social solidarity secured across class and race and gender? How can we do so again? How was national unity established across Canada's many provinces with their varying interests? And can we do that again as we move off fossil fuels? How did we transform our economy and marshal all of our resources to produce what was needed? Can we do that again? How did we pay for all of that? And can we mobilize the necessary finances again? And interestingly, and particularly for this audience, what did we do for returning soldiers? And is there a model there for just transition for fossil fuel workers today? What was the role of Indigenous people in the war? What is it in today's transformation? What was the role of social movements and youth then and now? But also importantly, what are the war's cautionary tales? The things that brought us shame, the internments, the squashing of civil rights, the poisoning of Indigenous lands, the response to refugees, the last one's probably most apt for the present, the things that we don't want to repeat. And running through it all, what sort of political leadership do we require to see us through challenges like this? And I'll offer one important comparison that I make near the beginning of the book because it gives me some hope, and it's this, which is that despite Canada's war declaration in September of 1939, it's worth recalling that even as the winds of war were gathering in the late 1930s, our leaders and actually much of the public were reluctant to recognize what would ultimately be necessary. A lot like today, I think. Canada was on the cusp of being completely transformed by its Second World War experience, yet right up to the 11th hour, our government still hoped to avoid getting dragged into that fight. And I feel like that's where we find ourselves again today in this awkward period where, last summer, Justin Trudeau's government will pass a climate emergency motion in the House of Commons one day and then reapprove the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion the very next day. That's a dynamic I refer to as the new climate denialism. It's a concept I unpack in the book. But I'm convinced that this sort of phony war period we find ourselves in is going to come to an end. In the first chapter of the book, just to give you a teaser, I share what I see as some of the key lessons from the Second World War, which I dubbed the battle plan for climate mobilization. It's a 14-point plan outlining what does it look like to adopt an emergency mindset and do what it actually takes to win. I don't have time to go through all of those steps, but all of those lessons, but I do want to highlight a couple that I think are most relevant to this audience. One lesson is that inequality is toxic to social solidarity and mass mobilization. A lot of the book deals with the connections between climate action and inequality, and it argues for why linking these crises is central to winning. There's a lot of climate purists out there, policy wonks out there who are like, don't link climate to inequality, don't link it to social justice. It's complicated enough as it is. Don't make it more complicated. And I am arguing that I think they are wrong. They are wrong because the two issues are inherently linked. The richer you are, the higher your emissions. The poorer you are as an individual or a community or a country, the more vulnerable you are to climate change. But as I say, we also need to link these issues because that's how we win. Successful mobilizations require that people make common cause across class and race and gender, and that the public have confidence that sacrifices are being made by the rich as well as middle and modest income people. During the First World War, inequality undermined all of those efforts. And so at the beginning of the Second World War, the government actually undertook bold steps to lessen inequality. They brought in an excess profits tax. And this is what we're hearing now with the NDP's recent initiative in the last couple of days. The kind of profiteering that we've seen in this pandemic was illegal in the Second World War. And on the flip side, look at what labor achieved during the Second World War. Canada's first key major social programs came in the war. Unemployment insurance, 1940, the family allowance, 1944. In fact, the Marsh Report, this famous Royal Commission that laid the architecture for all of the post-war welfare state, was written during the war, and it was offered up to Canadians as a promise and a pledge that the society that they would come back to would look different. That's how you mobilize people when you're asking them to do a great undertaking like this. And I'm convinced that's what we need to do again when it comes to climate. Another important lesson is around creating new economic institutions. During the Second World War, starting from a base of almost nothing, the Canadian economy and its labor force pumped out planes and vehicles and ships at this incredible breakneck speed, right? We produced more military vehicles than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. We built over 700 ships. We built 16,000 aircraft, all in 6 years. And the minister who oversaw all of this, and I'm sure you'll all appreciate the irony of this, was this guy, C.D. Howe. Now, we all know his name because this right-wing think tank in your good city is named after the guy. And he was no lefty, let's be clear about that. But he was seized with the task at hand in World War II. He created 28 crown corporations during the war in order to meet the supply and munitions needs of the war effort. In contrast, Justin Trudeau has created 2 crown corporations, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which is this vehicle for privatizing infrastructure, and the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I think we, again, the climate emergency demands a similar approach. We have to conduct an inventory of all of our conversion needs, determine how many heat pumps and solar arrays and wind farms and electric buses we're going to need to electrify virtually everything and end our reliance on fossil fuels. And we're going to need a new generation of crown corporations to then ensure those items are manufactured at the requisite scale. And a final key lesson I'll mention for this audience is around leaving no one behind. Now, lots of people, when they think about the climate transition ahead of us, worry about jobs. There's 300,000 jobs in Canada that are directly involved in fossil fuel industries. And we need a robust just transition plan for all of those people. But consider this, in the Second World War, we were a population of only about 11 million people then. Over 1 million Canadians enlisted into military service, and more than that were directly employed in munitions production. All of those people had to be trained up. All of those people had to be reintegrated into a peacetime economy. That took careful planning, and we created income support programs and housing support programs and post-secondary programs that transformed the post-secondary sector for a generation. If we could do all of that then, I'm convinced that we can do it again. I'll conclude with this. Like many of you, as I read the latest scientific warnings, I'm afraid, I feel anxiety about the state of the world we're leaving for our kids and those who are going to live out the rest of this century. All of us who take seriously these scientific realities wrestle with despair. This is the ambiguous time we live in. And the truth is, we don't know if we're going to win this fight, if we're going to rise to this challenge in time. But it's worth remembering that those who rallied in the face of fascism 80 years ago likewise didn't know if they would win. We often forget that there was a big chunk of the early years where the outcome was far from certain. We know how the story ended, but they didn't. And yet they rallied regardless, and in the process surprised themselves by what they were capable of achieving. I think that's, as we approach Remembrance Day next week, it's a little reminder worth holding on to, and the spirit that I think we need today. I'll stop there, John.
Thanks very much, Seth. Really, really appreciate it. We have time for a couple of questions. While we're looking to see if somebody's putting their hand up, I will say that I put in the chat a link to a review that I wrote of the book. Seth was kind enough to send me that in advance, and I wrote for the Council of Canadians. And it really is important reading for us to feel confident that we can actually make these demands for a good jobs economy and a just recovery for all. So I'm looking at speakers. First is Nigel. Arif. Questions, I should say.
Sure. Thanks very much, John, and thanks, Seth, for the presentation. I definitely am gonna. I've already downloaded a copy of it, so I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm a school teacher with the largest school board, and my colleagues. I have a couple of them on the line already today. Just transition, fighting for a green economy, the new Green Deal is something that many of us as progressives here in Canada have believe in and been fighting for. But I guess, my question is going to be specifically around the political will to make it happen. right? Because what we're seeing in Canada already is like this big, great divide between the West and the East, that we downtowners want to have our, our electric cars and our green, our, things that are, we want this to happen immediately. And yet when you go out to Alberta, what you hear is, that there's still such a dependence on the economy for the, for jobs that are connected to oil. So how do we, especially as working class people, how are we going to be able to build that political will to make it happen? The argument that you've made, the wartime effort, there's a few folks that have written about it. Your sister, Van Jones in the States has written about it. I feel like it's how are we going to build a political will to make that happen? Sorry, I know that's a pretty
no, it's a good question.
And let me do as we did before. We'll take a couple questions and then you can put them together just for our own time. I see David Kidd with a question.
So just a quick response, Seth, and I hope you respond to it. Thank you so much for Canadianizing the need for a collective response to the climate emergency. We never had a New Deal, but we did have wartime mobilization that continued after the war. I live in a part of Toronto where all the housing for working class people was built in response to soldiers returning. The Labour Council's physical location is close to the Golden Mile, where a lot of the municipal plants were. They were owned by the Canadian people. So again, we can do this again. The one thing that's positive for me potentially is under COVID, people have understood somewhat, not completely, and there's been these people who are fighting back, and you can see the Ford government's budget today. But COVID has at least given people a sense again of the need for collective action together and for our provincial and federal governments to take the lead. And so I thank you so much for your book. It's an amazing contribution to this fight.
Thank you.
Okay, Seth, why don't you go ahead and comment on that? I think we're going to have to, well, maybe we'll see if there's one more question, but go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you both. And as Nigel, I was briefly a socialist high school teacher myself in Toronto at Northern Secondary School a long time ago. And so my alternate agenda with the book is that it would make the study of World War II interesting and relevant finally. And I think it does that. So you talked about political will. And of course, that's what we need. And I'm also trying to offer a reminder in the book at how quickly we can be surprised by our capacity to bring it about. If you had said to Canadians in 1938, does this Mackenzie King government have it in them to engage in the audacious wartime effort that they did? Most of us would have said no. And if you had asked me 10 months ago, if the people existed at the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Canada who could have quickly created these audacious programs like the CERB and the wage subsidy, I would have told you, no, there was nobody home. And I would have been wrong. I mean, it's amazing how quickly these things can actually pivot. But you were also raising the challenges around Alberta in particular. I want to recommend the book to you. And in particular, I commissioned some original polling for the book from Abacus Research for two reasons. Well, one is I interviewed many politicians and political insiders for part of the book research. And I wasn't interested in talking to climate deniers. I was interested in talking to politicians who claim to get it and yet whose governments don't practice an agenda that aligns with the science. And when you press these folks, they almost all fall back onto some variant of, well, you got to meet the public where they're at, and they're not there. Now, first of all, the leaders we most remember from the Second World War, of course, didn't meet the public where they were at. They took them where they had to go. But even so, I thought I would test that proposition. And what I found in the Abacus polling is a population that is in fact ahead of our politics when it comes to both the understanding of the emergency and their willingness to accept bold climate action. And it ranges from a high in Quebec to a low, as you would expect, in Alberta. Yet even in Alberta, it's remarkably high. Even in Alberta, half the population is ready to accept that we need to wind down the oil and gas industry in the next 20 or 30 years. So I think we have a politics that isn't giving the government enough credit on a lot of these things. That said, we do need to make a real and bold offer to your working people in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland, because they have a lot of heavy lifting to do. 38% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions are from Alberta, way more than their share of the population. So I actually propose, it's actually an idea I cooked up in my chat with Gil McGowan, the president of the Federation of Labor in Alberta, which is we need a new federal transfer that I would call a climate emergency just transition transfer. It would be big, $20 to $40 billion a year. But unlike most federal transfers, which divvy up based on population, we would divvy it up by GHG emissions. If Alberta's responsible for 38% of the GHG emissions, we'll give them 38% of the money. But we wouldn't give it to Jason Kenney. We would create a new just transition agency there with labor and business and municipalities and First Nations and the governance of it. And each province could figure out what they need to actually catapult the transition in their province. To David, your question, yes. I mean, so much of why we have not succeeded in the last 20 to 30 years is because so much of climate action has been pitched as individual, what you individually should do, or what are you individually willing to change or do as a consumer. But the climate emergency, like the war, is an inherently collective enterprise. We have to talk about it that way. And we need to approach it with a similar level of ambition. I think in some ways, the most insidious legacy of these 40 years of neoliberalism isn't the tax cuts and the spending cuts and the privatization and the deregulation. It's the sapping of our sense of ambition and our belief in our capacity to do great things together. That's what we need to restore. And I think you're right that COVID has actually given us a glimmer of a reminder of what that can look like. The Bank of Canada has acted unlike we've seen since the Second World War. And really what we've had revealed is what was possible all along when we treat these things as emergencies.
Great. I don't see anybody else asking a question. Well, Seth, I'll throw in one final question then for you. We heard a report earlier on from the election south of the border. I don't know if you caught the tail end of that from a brother from Chicago, but it's heartbreaking, that working class people have fallen for that continuation of that right-wing narrative. And we know that, a lot of it is, and my grandfather was a coal miner and his father before him and his father before him, right? But we know that people are desperately wanting to hold on to what they know. A good friend of mine who heads the AFL-CIO in Texas, and the remarkable increase they made in progressive vote there is certainly to be admired. But he would say when you talk to energy workers, they think when you use the word just transition, you're talking about a funeral in slow motion. Mm-hmm. How do we get past that distrust, skepticism, fear, mm-hmm. and bring a sense of people who are connected, whether it's directly in this, in the tar sands, or whether it's people here whose work, needs to be greened up, that this can be an optimistic future for them and their families.
Well, this is why I say with the just transition transfer, people need to see the money on the table, right? I mean, you're quite right that just transition for a lot of people rings very hollow, as a very hollow promise, and for good reason. In many ways, the war was that rare moment when the promise of support for transition was real, and it's been a long time. This, I think, is part of the appeal of the Green New Deal, is in the context of this whole jobs versus environment false choice, it flips it all on its head and says, we're going to make the job creation piece of this front and center. It's actually going to be, tackling inequality and job insecurity is actually going to be at the heart of it. And incidentally, in the polling, when you actually do that, when you link bold climate action to the tackling of inequality and the kinds of things in the Green New Deal, it's dramatically popular on both sides of the border. But the money has to be real. So, and this is where I think, if anything, Trudeau needs to be taking a lesson from Biden. The Biden climate plan is $2 trillion over 4 years. Now, granted, he's still going to have to get it through the Senate, and that'll be challenging. But just for a moment, think about that. $2 trillion or $500 billion a year. Divide that by 10 to put that in the Canadian economy terms. That would still be $50 billion a year on climate initiatives. The Trudeau government's talking about $2 billion a year, right? So we just have to, in order to make that promise to people that the supports are going to be there, we need to dramatically increase our level of ambition. The money has to be there. And I actually think also at the heart of the Green New Deal is a federal jobs guarantee. And there's every reason to include that in it, because the task is monumental. Our problem isn't going to be a loss of jobs. It's going to be finding enough labor to actually rise to this challenge. So that's what I think we need to offer.
Great. Well, my favorite quote from your book, Seth, is the cabinet minister who, when asked, how on earth can we afford to do this? The response is, if we lose this war, nothing else matters.
Yeah, that was C.D. Howe.
And in truth, if we lose this fight against climate change, then our grandkids will wonder what on earth we did. So I really want to thank you for your leadership. It's a wonderful book. I would urge people to go to sethklein.ca and figure out how to get that book, buy this book, and take it from the library. But we really want to thank you for joining us tonight, Seth, and all the best in spreading that message. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is we have a statement, a roof over our heads. It was sent out to all of the delegates. We're not going to try and put the whole statement up there. We may end up putting the recommendations. But this is an issue which has been brewing for an awful long time. We have, as you'll see in the statement, the Labour Council in the 70s created the Labour Council Development Foundation. It was the largest builder of co-op houses in the Greater Toronto region for a number of years. But starting with the Mike Harris Revolution, we started seeing homeless people sleeping on heating grates. And the first few times it was a shock until it became normal. So this statement is a result of a lot of looking at the issues that are in front of us, very complex. Before I recognize Helen, we did ask a representative from ACORN, which is fabulous organization of low and moderate income families who are been very much fighting around housing issues for years. Sister Kumba Robinson, to say a couple words about what they see around housing issues, and then we'll start speakers with Helen. Is Kumba with us?
Yeah, so Kemba, if you would unmute yourself. I can see that you're here by phone.
Yeah, how do you do that, Susan? Is it *6 or something?
Yeah, there we are.
Okay.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My camera is not working on my computer, so unfortunately you won't be able to see me. But hopefully you'll hear my statement loud, clearly. So thank you for the opportunity to make this speech. It is housing is the #1 issue for ACORN members all over Toronto and across the country. As you know, ACORN is a community union and moderate income people fighting for social and economic justice. We have over 130,000 members in 9 cities across 25 neighborhoods. We are a membership organization, grassroots membership led and founded by members pitching in. It is the housing, as I said, is the #1 issue for ACORN members all across the country. ACORN members have been experiencing the housing crisis before COVID, and it's only gotten worse now that COVID is here, which is why we are so active and engaged in our housing campaigns. We're fighting for affordable housing, and we're also winning an inclusionary zoning bylaw in Toronto that would force all new developments to include affordable housing. The province has been slowing us down, and the city plan is very weak, but ACORN members are fighting for 20 to 30% of all new developments to be set as affordable housing. We'll be flooding the final public consultation held by the city on Tuesday, November the 10th at 7 p.m. Hopefully, some of you guys will be able to join us. We're also fighting for healthy homes. We want a safe bylaw in 2017 after we had spent 13 long years fighting for landlord licensing. This means that apartments in Toronto get inspected on a regular basis. So many long-term tenants are forced out of their units by negligent landlords and who ignore repairs so that they can rent when the next tenant moves in. Protecting affordable housing requires enforcing property standards. We expect a vote on an improved rent-safe program soon. We will send out online actions, and we hope a lot of people will be able to join us. We're fighting for vacancy control also and real rent control. Doug Ford, as we know, got rid of rent control in 2018. We need to win it back. Doug Ford also has a freeze for rent in 2021, which will probably things because anything that Doug Ford touches only gets worse. Because landlords will have an incentive to either evict existing tenants to raise rent or go for an AGI to raise the rent. An eviction moratorium with a ban on AGIs and bringing control. Does anyone here, if anyone lives in a Capri's building, ACORN has found out that the profits that Capri makes amounts to $1,000 a minute. They make that much money by getting tenants out and jacking up the rent by applying for a amount of AGIs, and they don't even pay taxes on that profit. They pay 0% tax. ACORN launched the Capri ACORN Tenant Union. We're putting a report out on Monday highlighting Capri's awful practices, and we'll be rolling out actions across the city in the next few weeks. If anyone or you know anyone who lives in a Capri building, you can reach out to ACORN and we can get them some help. We have a year in virtual celebration on December the 29th. We'll discuss our victories and have guest speakers and plan out how we're going to win even bigger in 2021. You're all invited to any of that we're having. Everybody is welcome. And if, like I said, if you know anybody that's experiencing housing crisis during this COVID time, please have them reach out to ACORN at 416-461-9233. Thank you very much for this opportunity to highlight the.
Kemba, could you repeat the phone number and we'll put it on the chat?
Yes.
It's
416-461-9233.
Thank you. And Kemba, you're a volunteer activist and leader within ACORN. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your efforts, your leadership. We've known ACORN, it's one of our closest allies in the labor movement in this city. And every one of you is just fabulous in the work you do. Just want to thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having ACORN at your meeting tonight.
Okay, the next speaker, Helen Kennedy, and then see if there's anybody else wants to speak on the statement. And we'll put back the recommendations on the screen. Helen?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks to the executive board for bringing this forward. I appreciate it. People who weren't here last month may have missed that there has been a homelessness resolution that's been circulating amongst some labor councils. I just wanted to highlight two differences that between that resolution and this one. First of all, it's around the definition of affordable housing. And it's a real problem, because what's affordable to you and I, those who are living on pension, those who might be working on a temp job that is unionized but not guaranteed hours, it's very difficult to define what affordable is. Across the province, the definition of affordable housing is basically that if you pay less than 30% of your pre-tax income on shelter. If you pay more than that, then you're deemed to have core housing needs. If you spend 50% or more, you're in severe housing need. And that basically addresses most of the people who are renting in Toronto, who are working people. But that's not the definition that is of affordable housing in Toronto. Affordable housing in Toronto is based on the total monthly shelter cost, including heat and hydro, which is at or below the average monthly rent of each unit. And the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Company reports what the average monthly rent is. And this is included in the statement that the average market rent for a 2-bedroom is $1,591 a month. That's in Toronto. So if we look at that figure and what the shelter allowance is for a family of 4 in Toronto, the shelter allowance for a family of 4 is $756. That is half the cost of what the affordable rent is. Based on the CMHC definition. So you can see that if you are, the other factor to, in order to afford the average monthly rent that as defined by CMHC, you have to be making at least $24 an hour. So we know that that's not where a lot of working people are in the city, and certainly not a lot of working people who don't have unions. We're thinking of the workers at the Fiera Foods, the workers who are on contract through agencies. They're not getting that kind of money. So you can see that that's, all the conditions that go into the increase in homelessness, the increase in evictions, and I appreciate that that's addressed in the statement. The one other thing, so in our original statement, we say, because we want to be just a little bit more revolutionary, is not that housing should be 30% or less, that housing should be 20% or less, because that would make a big difference in terms of those people who are on social assistance and those people who are making not even $15 an hour. But in order to do that, you also have to be invested in public housing stock, that not leaving it up to the developers. As my sister from Acorn just mentioned, developers are making money hand over fist, especially in Toronto, where the demands are high and the vacancy rates are low. I want to address point 5 in the demands, which is, it says to retain and expand affordable housing by implementing mandatory inclusion zones. I think there's a lot of problems with mandatory inclusion zones because you're working with developers who want to make the maximum profit for their investments. And if you get into the negotiations around mandatory inclusion zones, it's like entering into this tripartism, but it's in the housing sector. And I think that we really need, what it means basically is giving incentives to developers by giving them, by excusing them from some regulations, like not donating funds to help build our community centers and other daycare centers, by excusing them from adhering to planning guidelines like height restrictions, number of units that they can build, or green space that would be as part of the planning. So I just don't think that we're there yet. I think the housing crisis is much more severe. Mandatory inclusion zones also tend to benefit those who are looking at buying a home. And I think, and as a homeowner myself, I think that should be everybody's right to have a home. But when there's so many thousands of people in Toronto who are either not have any home or can't afford a home to live in, or they're living in a home that is substandard, I think that we really need to focus on what our demand should be. And again, thank you to the executive for bringing this forward. I really appreciate it. And I think that a lot of, just as an example, in my own local union, QP 79, we have a lot of part-time workers. And, you know, it used to be that they were kids who worked for the city and the recreation department after school, but that's not the case anymore. They are people who are, who have partners, have children, who are living and renting in Toronto, and who more and more are having problems managing to pay the rent and to feed the kids. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks for your leadership on this as well. Our next speaker is Alex Moldovan, followed by Kingsley Kwok. Alex?
Hey folks, first off, thank you, Kemba, for presenting this, and thanks to the executive committee for bringing this motion forward. As a renter in Toronto my whole life, it really does hit home. I'm a little new here. I'm a new delegate from QP 3903. I just wanted to ask if it was possible to amend to perhaps include language for a rent strike, to put more teeth into this. Because I think, you know, our communities have been under attack for months since the pandemic started, and I don't know, it would really feel more powerful if we actually
don't do, Alex, just to let you know, we don't do amendments from the floor.
Okay.
If there's huge issues, people can refer it back to the executive, but we generally, you know, have a lot of input into this. So, you know, we're happy to. The implementation, of course, you know, will be informed by some of what delegates also tell us from the floor, but that's not in our bylaws to do amendments from the floor. So, but go ahead with your points. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to ask that. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. I had Kingsley Kwok, then Nigel, then Miles Magner. Kingsley?
Thank you, John. Like Helen said, a lot of tenants facing the threat of eviction are not only the poor or the retired. A lot of tenants now during the pandemic facing evictions are essential workers. They are part-time workers, they're casual workers, contract workers. And with Bill 148, we have now seen the law strip away the tenants to stay in their own home, and allowing eviction notices happening without a hearing at the landlord and tenant board. And we have now seen from time to time in the news of sheriffs giving out eviction notices with big groups of police, whether it is in East York or Scarborough or other places. So it's a big problem, and I'm glad we have this statement, and I'm glad it mentions Bill 148, and the demands have included what we are doing about renovictions, evictions, and the like. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Nigel, followed by Miles Magner.
Thank you. I think Kingsley said much of what I wanted to say, so I just want to share just a personal anecdote with some activists in Parkdale that we've been trying to support a family. Michael Lax is the owner of Nuspor Investments, and he owns a high-rise apartment down at 1251 King Street in Parkdale. And like right now, he's trying to kick out one of his tenants that he's had there since 1987, who's there now unemployed due to COVID with their disabled child. This government and what Kingsley's pointed out with the bill is letting landlords attack these types of workers, these unemployed and unorganized workers. I am so proud that the committee that's brought this forward, and I really hope that we all support this. This is the social justice work that Labor has always done and needs to continue to do. So I'm definitely in support of this and grateful for the demands that have been brought forward.
Thank you. Last speaker I have is Miles.
Thanks very much, Sean. Hi, everybody. So I wanted to speak to this as well as my partner. I have my camera off. Sorry. So you missed my partner diving into the screen. I think it's great that this motion is coming forward now, and the report is very good. As the report suggests, there are very serious long-term policy issues here. The struggle for affordable housing, the struggle to prevent the wholesale gentrification of the city of Toronto, where working people can no longer afford to live in the city where they work. Huge problem, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's also the very acute nature of the housing issue and the homelessness issue under COVID. And I was glad to see that that's in the document as well. I just want to talk a little bit about briefly about the backdrop, which is, and I think many of us are aware of that, in the last 10 years or so, there's been a rapid increase in the financialization of the rental housing market. More and more housing, rental buildings, particularly large buildings, but not exclusively large buildings, are owned by real estate investment trusts, by pension funds, by other hedge funds, other big pools of capital. And their objective is clearly to maximize both the value of the property and the income they can extract from those properties at any cost. And that's why we've seen the rise in rent evictions. And I believe that we need to understand Bill 184 in that context. These people are not dummies. And I believe they subscribe to the view that this is an excellent crisis that they're not going to let waste. So by pushing through Bill 184, with Doug Ford removing the brief temporary freeze on evictions, we are already seeing an increase in evictions before the landlord, or eviction applications for eviction notices before the landlord and tenant board. And this is going to be a huge crisis, definitely in Toronto and the GTA, but also across the province. So I think it's something that we need to jump right on. One of the things that I think, and the previous speaker spoke to tactics like rent strikes and that sort of thing. There's some really interesting tenant organizing going on. Very happy to hear the speaker from OCAP speak to that. There are tenant groups who are organizing to prevent evictions, to just stop it. Some OPSU members, some OPSU locals have voted to support these kinds of actions as well. And a few locals have passed a resolution. And we're going to be doing outreach within the region to encourage our locals to do a few things. And I suggest that this is something that other unions with representatives on the call may want to consider, which is actually having a discussion about this issue within your locals, inviting a speaker to come in, passing a motion, and looking to develop a way to engage your members actively in these struggles. In August, so OPSU members touch this issue in a whole number of ways. We work in social service agencies, in agencies that work with homeless and poor communities. We also represent folks in the Ontario Public Service who operate the Landlord and Tenant Board. Our members staff the Landlord and Tenant Board tribunals, and our members are provincial sheriffs who serve these eviction notices. So it's a very complicated thing for our members in our unions, but everyone recognizes that it's a crisis. In the local that represents sheriff's officers, we also have hundreds of fixed term and contract casual workers in the courts, many of whom are without work and who are on the brink of eviction themselves. So this is a really important issue for us. We're going to be encouraging our members to get involved. There was a successful picket the first day that the sheriff's officers were being ordered out to issue eviction notices, and we picketed their cars so that, and we had some good discussions with the sheriff's officers, but no cars left the lot that day. There have been tenants organizations have been picketing at when there's an expectation that there's going to be a notice to be served, which is why sheriff's officers are now showing up with a phalanx of cops. And the Landlord and Tenant Board is going to be restarting hearings in Toronto sometime within the next few weeks, and undoubtedly there are going to be actions there. So I'm going to encourage people. There's a lot of these things are all announced in social media. Form networks, identify some of your activists who want to come out and actually prevent the eviction of other working class people from their houses. I think we need to do the hard work, the policy work, the work with allies to try to influence the legislative and policy agenda. But I think an important way to put that pressure on is to make evictions unenforceable in Toronto.
Great, thanks, Miles. And if you could maybe send us a note of if local unions did want to have somebody come to speak on this issue, then we could let them know how to contact OPSU. And I know OPSU has been, really strong on this. And, we've also supported the rent strikes that were happening last year. We know this is real and it's got to get done. Okay, no more speakers. We're going to go to the vote now to endorse the statement. And we'll put that up, please. And then we'll get ready for the correspondence. Brother Abdi will be presenting the correspondence motions. Vote can come up. Okay, and Abdi, are you ready to do the correspondence?
Yes, brother, I'm ready. Good evening, sisters and brothers, comrades. We have 3 correspondence tonight. The first one is request from Progress Toronto for a donation towards their online fundraising event, Dreaming Bigger, Demanding Better. The executive board recommends a donation of $1,500.
And that's our main sister organization that is involved in municipal politics, Progress Toronto. So all in favor, please vote on that. You can start reading the
second one.
Recommendation.
Yeah. So we have a second request from Mennonite New Life Center for a donation towards their virtual fundraising event in good company, celebrating our communities. The executive board recommends a donation of $100.
And the Mennonite Center is one of the strong social justice organizations in Toronto that supports particularly refugees. And this celebration is for Latin American families. We wanted to give $100, so that motion is in front of you.
The final correspondence tonight is request from a Berwick, Toronto, Sexual Violence Survivor Support Network for a donation. They currently donate from $250 to $500 per survivor. The executive board recommends a donation of $100.
And that's through an OPERG organization that supports sexual survivors. And the motion's in front of you.
And that concludes our correspondence tonight. Thank you, sisters and brothers and comrades.
Thank you, Abdi. Next, the CLC has been involved in a major campaign across this country to push the federal government on the promises that have been made in the throne speech. And I and many of our executive board members and others have been out lobbying members of parliament this last little while. But I'll ask Heather Ellen from the CLC to just talk a bit about that campaign. Heather.
Thanks for that, John, and good evening, everyone. So just to pick up where John left off, as you have seen from labor councils all across the country, there's been a massive initiative in order to do a lobby week this week. Typically, it would have been on the Hill, and there would have been activists that would have driven or flown in to talk with their MPs on the Hill. And of course, this year that would be unsafe to do so. So we've been doing lobbies virtually. And what I really enjoy about this year is that it's given a lot more incentive for people, activists on the ground, to get involved and get experience with lobbying their MPs. I'm really happy to say that in Ontario, we've secured over 51 lobbies with MPs, which is really, it really speaks to just the motivation of people on labor councils. And if you are an interested activist in doing this kind of an action, we do have some for this region still coming up next week. So please feel free to reach out to the Labor Council in order to sign up and get all of the information you need for when those are happening. It's really good experience, whether you've done it 100 times or never before. There's definitely a space for you in order to gain a little more experience in holding your MP or elected officials accountable. Another lens to this is that this email went out to activists that have engaged with the CLC Forward Together campaign across the country. and over 1,000 activists nationwide have signed up to lobby their MPs on a personal level. So a lot of those would have been union members, but certainly other people in the general public that see our values as something that align with their own, and have taken a pretty substantial action in order to move that forward. And just to comment as far as some of the other major things that have been happening across the country, since the Forward Together campaign launched, we've had over 40,000 new people sign on to say that this is something that they want to be fighting for as far as the vision for Canada that believes in investing into people that live here in Canada, rather than the right-wing version of what we need, which would be very deep and difficult austerity. So we're very glad to see more and more people getting on board with that public discussion. And I did want to comment on the NDP winning majority government out in BC. I think that is, it's just a wonderful thing to see. And what we saw out of that campaign, alongside our very deep left values and seeing social systems be protected and expanded upon, but we also saw a very robust campaign as far as why the left is good at managing the economy, which isn't typically our wheelhouse. But when we look at, societies that have very strong unionization, that correlates directly to an economy that is resilient. And when we're looking at getting through this pandemic, a resilient economy with strong unionization is certainly what we're all fighting for. So I hope to continue to see that from the left, and I think that we're going to be seeing more and more of that going forward. I did want to comment as well on some of the cross-jurisdictional efforts that have been happening as far as long-term care. We've heard many excellent speakers here at this Labour Council talk on this. The Ontario Health Coalition is supporting Bill 13, as well as the Federation of Labour. It passed its second reading on November 2nd. And if you haven't heard of the bill, which I'm sure everyone here has, but it is an amendment to the Long-Term Care Homes Act, so that long-term carers will have to provide residents with at least 4 hours a day of nursing and personal support services. So there are means to lobby your MPPs on that. And it is a direct piece that the CLC has been working on as well, in that one of our planks is making sure that our healthcare is expanded and supported, in knowing that, the first case of a COVID death and 82% of all COVID-related deaths have happened in long-term care. So this work between the province and the federal government is crucial in order to see real change. So of course, we're supporting all of the efforts that are happening with that. Again, everyone here well knows that November 25th is the elimination of violence against women and girls internationally, and then 16 days of action here in Canada leading up to December 6th being the massacre that happened in 1989 in Canada. So we will be seeing more coming from the CLC in regards to that tying in with our current Forward Together campaign, as well as the Done Waiting campaign, as to what we can be pushing for from our federal government to ensure that women and girls are protected. So those are the major updates from the CLC at this current time, and thank you for your attention this evening.
Thank you. See a speaker, Denise Martin.
Yeah, hi. I don't know. I wanted to take a little bit of an opportunity to, I was just really shocked to see the CLC put out a statement jointly with the Chamber of Commerce endorsing Bill Morneau. It was really hurtful as a working person. And just to see Hassan Youssef do this was really hurtful. To hear that Mark Hancock, our QP national president, was not even consulted and didn't even know about it. It just keeps happening. The CLC keeps putting statements out there with the Chamber of Commerce, and I don't know how to say, like, please stop. Like, I don't know how. I just need that to stop. I don't know what my power is here as a delegate, but like it's just funny to hear reports from like the staff that are talking about like lobbying the federal government and all these things, and then having Hassan Youssef turn around and say we endorse Bill Morneau, who I think we all know has hurt working class people. What's happening? Like, how is that possible?
Okay. John Humphrey, you have your hand up too?
Well, my point was the same one as Denise just put forward. I would like to know
what the rationale for that decision was and what the consultation process was, because I don't think that Hassan Youssef was speaking for the majority of trade unions in this country. But perhaps you know more about it than I do.
Yeah, well, I'm not aware of the consultation. I know a number of national unions have come out and said that they were not consulted and that they did not agree with that. And it's unfortunate that it's happened. Next, we have council projects and committees, and then we have a special report from Workers United, a group of workers that were involved. I see Mike Boyd from Local 30. Are you putting your hand up, Mike?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to try and comment there on what Denise was saying. I actually saw the letter that the Durham Labor Council had put out through their social media, and a similar letter that was kind of reiterated the same kind of tone with Cup W on their website. And I noticed the Durham Labor Council had requested Hassan Youssef attend the next monthly meeting, or another member of the executive board, to kind of try and justify this appointment. And I'm curious as to what the executive of the Toronto York Region Labor Council feels, if maybe we should have somebody who comes from the executive or Hassan himself to try and, offer up some explanation for an appointment where it's obviously raised a few eyebrows amongst people.
We haven't talked about it, but we'll take that into a conversation that we have with the next executive. I see Laura Thompson up next.
Thanks, John.
Okay, you're welcome. Laura?
Hi, Laura Thompson, pronouns she, her, Officer Local 503, reporting on behalf of the Women's Committee. So some folks may know, we've been hosting our Sisters of the Roundtable sessions virtually. So they'll be happening throughout the month of November. The first session happened this Tuesday with a conversation with grocery store workers, registered personal nurse, RPNs, childcare workers, shelter workers, on their realities of being on the front line during the pandemic, and conversations about the reality of working women, working non-binary and gender diverse people during this time. Our next session is next Tuesday. So throughout the month of November, they'll be taking place Tuesday at 7 p.m. We do need you to please register to be able to access the session. Just to give you an idea of what to expect, our next session will be on women confronting racism. Obviously, we are all aware that we're living in a time of so much momentum when it comes to racial justice. So our goal is definitely to provide a space to talk about how we can continue doing that work through our unions, workplaces, and communities. Then the session following that will be on ending gender-based violence and a just recovery for all. So we'll be putting that I'll be putting that in the chat now momentarily, as well for participants or just any other union sisters or gender or non-binary and gender diverse comrades. We do have a Facebook group going, Sisters of the Roundtable Fall Series. So we can put that in the chat as well, so you can all connect, and we hope that you join us. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Is there any other committees before I move to reports of unions?
Yes, John.
Ainsworth, go ahead.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Let me get some video on. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Ainsworth, reporter for the Equity Committee. So our Indigenous Workers of Color conference, not conference actually, the podcast will take place later this November, and we'll be sending some information in the next few days. And our Bromley Awards is put off until next year, 2021, April or May, sometime there. Thank you, John.
Okay, so reports of unions, Sister Jenny from Workers United, you had a couple of folks that wanted to talk about an issue that you're involved in.
Yes, thank you so much, John. We really appreciate being able to speak. So I'm here with my local. They've asked me to give a small recap of our health and safety campaign, and then Salam will say a few words as well. First and foremost, I just want to say it's been a complete honor, and I'm in just complete awe of the fearlessness of these group of workers at my workplace who have been fearlessly standing up for health and safety. And so this week we've launched a campaign starting with a solidarity letter that we've reached out to the community to support the issues that they are facing. Over the past 5 months, these workers and the clients that also reside and use the services of that space has had a horrific cockroach infestation. Halloween just passed, but honestly, if they were going to give tours of the space, that would have been the haunted house of the year. It is absolutely horrific. I'll spare you guys some of the disgusting details, but I can tell you 2 days ago when public health came and visited, there was 6 cockroach sightings and some on the workers' bodies. It is unbelievably unacceptable. Our employer has denied this grievance, saying it's not a health and safety issue. Public health has passed the space, and the Ministry of Labor, when we did a work refuser, has also said it's not a health and safety issue. The workers refuse this. They believe that this is completely unacceptable for both themselves and the clients. And actually, it's completely insulting when we have an employer that says right to our face that it is an inherent risk of the job based on the population we serve. We just had a very important discussion about social housing. We absolutely need more social housing, but we need social housing with dignity and respect, and that is clean and safe. It is not okay for upper management to deem that this is acceptable and take minimal action and have huge negligence. Absolutely unacceptable. I also want to say, in the era of COVID, it's becoming clearer and clearer and clearer that workers must be in control of their own health and safety. We need to set the standards because these systems are failing us. Our employers are failing us. We are demanding that they do better, but it is so evident that it is us that needs to fight for this. So I want to pass it over to my incredible comrade in the struggle. And again, it's an incredible group of workers as well. And please support our campaign. I know that my other comrade in the struggle at Workers United is going to post our social media post so you can see the solidarity letter. Please submit it. In the past few days alone, we've had over 47 letters come in. So let's keep up the public pressure because this is not okay. And we want to set a new standard for social housing, not just here at our agency, but for across the board, because we know that Toronto Community Housing also has a $1 billion backlog in maintenance. So I will pass it to you, Salam.
Thank you, Jenny. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm I'm one of the members of the grievance. Unfortunately, like we did the grievance, Jenny took you through the whole journey that we did for so long. Honestly, we feel like we are alone. Yes, we have the union backing us, but the problem is Ministry of Labor, even the public health, and even our employer, like they don't recognize the issue. The problem is the mentality of the city, let me say, or maybe the government and even the social services. They have this mentality that people on social assistance or people with low income, it's okay for them to live in such conditions. This is really not acceptable. It's a fight. It's been going for a long time right now, and I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. We really need all the support that we can get from everyone, because right now we're only left with the community. Like, we need the support from the community. We need the support from other workers, from other bodies to be able to continue our fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sister. And on the chat page, you can see the link to Facebook. So please go there and send a letter of support to these workers. It's a really important struggle. Other reports of unions, I see David Kidd. David?
Yes, thanks, John. And I really do appreciate the last two reports. I know a little bit about this for fighting the bed bug epidemic in the last decade with city shelter workers, and it's a tough fight, and I will send my solidarity. I'm just giving a quick report from the Toronto Workers History Project. On November 11th at 7 p.m., we are doing a special session on slavery in Ontario. And we are lucky to have Natasha Henry, president of the Ontario Black History Society. She has done a lot of research on slavery in Ontario, and she will be presenting her findings, stories that she's drawn up, and it'll be quite an exciting evening. For all the union, we're doing literally an antique roadshow of union paraphernalia in December. We've been thinking about doing this for a long time. Now, there are people that have banners. There are people that have buttons. There are people that have union cups. There are things that people have assembled over the years. I've been at many conventions where people used to settle together and trade these things. So we're literally going to make this into an antique roadshow December 1st, and I'm just giving you prior notice. The last comment, if you did miss the Chinese-Canadian session that we did in October, it was a wonderful session, and you can see it on our website, twhp.ca. Thank you, delegates.
Okay, thanks. Denise from 1281 QP.
Hey folks, my name is Denise Martin, so I'm a member of Local 1281 of the Canadian Union of Public Employees. My union, some of you are familiar with, some of you are probably not. We are a composite local, so we represent over 55 different workplaces and fairly small, usually fairly progressive, some student unions, stuff like that. And the big fight right now is that the Ryerson Students Union, so five, at a time where a student union should be fighting the government on layoffs and to increase funding and to ensure that teachers, are able to provide adequate support to students, they decided to lay off their staff. They laid off 5 full-time staff. And in an article at the Ryersonian, which is a student paper, they said that they are doing just what all other employers are doing across the province. So rather than mounting up a fight and saying, we're taking you on, Premier Ford, we're taking you on, Trudeau, we need support for students, they're saying, actually, we're gonna pack it all up and we're gonna lay people off. So we've had incredible support from QP Ontario in launching this fight. I want to share a petition. This is the one demand right now. When you sign this, it sends a message to the board saying, get these people back. Students need these people in place to support it, to have that support, but also just like step up your game in terms of the fight that we need student unions to be leading or be part of, I'm sorry. So I just wanted to share that link. And then another thing that QP 1281 recently put out, I don't know if people have been following around the IHRA and just the legislation that essentially saying that any criticism of Israel is deemed anti-Semitic. We just put out a statement on this. We're very troubled by this. I think it'll have a huge impact, particularly in academic locals, in our academic subunits, in determining what can be taught in the classroom and things like that. So I just wanted to flag that. And if you want to read more on that, you can head to our Facebook page, QP 1281, QP 1281, and the full statement is available there. Thank you.
Thanks. And just on a related issue, the Labour Council sent a letter condemning the Conservatives wanting to give the Canadian Christian College University granting degrees. You've probably seen all of that fiasco in the media. But about 2 years ago, they hosted at that place hate speakers, Faith Goldie, Ezra Levant, and others, and a number of unions were involved in a rally and protest against that. They had security were some of the neo-Nazis from Quebec that were brought in as security. It was pretty disgusting. So we hope that we can win that fight as well to keep post-secondary education with the integrity that's supposed to have for people from all backgrounds. Next is Kim Nasello from OPSU.
Hi, yes, Kim Nasello, OPSU Local 5111 President. I just wanted to talk about if people are unaware of what happened at the LCBO at Danforth and Victoria Park on, I'm trying to think, a week ago Sunday. which was there was a shooting at the store. It was outside of the store, but there was an altercation that started inside of the store regarding social distancing. And then it escalated outside where there was, where the suspect shot the victim, and the victim has succumbed to his injuries. And it was very traumatic for my members in the store that were working at the time. It happened at approximately 5:30 p.m. They were able to call 911, and at the time they were able to, the police were able to apprehend the car within, I believe, a 2-kilometer area of the store, and be able to arrest the person that accusedly has shot the man, and has charged him with first-degree murder. So there were 2 other people that were in the car that have not been charged as of yet, or if they will be. But EFAP has been brought into the store. They have been going through counseling. They are slowly returning back to work. Some are still off. But you know, it's very hard. You know, I hear everybody talking right now about frontline workers, and it is so important, you know, in grocery stores and everything. But remember about LCBO. LCBO is, I understand, we have been deemed an essential service, and it is very hard for us. People do not come in wearing masks. People, you know, basically, you know, we get sworn at, we get called names, we get called everything, right? You know, we do get spit on, but now that they're wearing masks, we don't get that happen to us that much anymore. So, which is good, in the fact that it's COVID. But we do have a hard time with the amount of people that come into our store, because it's not monitored for us. So we have to monitor it ourselves as a union, and we have to be on management for that. So I'm just letting you know.
Thanks for that report, Kim. And actually, that reminds me that, you know, normally this month in November, we host the Health and Safety Activists Award dinner to recognize health and safety activists, you know, from all kinds of different sectors. Also, our allies in the injured workers movement, we recognize. And sadly, because of COVID, we're not able to have that event this year. But, you know, people know that we have to be on the front lines, as we've heard from a number of speakers tonight, you know, absolutely being there for the health and safety of our members and for all residents of Greater Toronto. So I'm not seeing any more speakers, and it's after 9:30. So we'll adjourn this meeting. Hopefully, all of you will stay safe. Hopefully, you know, those of you whose members are not working now, be able to see some of them return to work in the next period of time. The return of, you know, the second wave is deeply troubling for all of us. And we saw that the Ford government's budget today is not addressing any of the root causes of this. We will continue our demand that all long-term care, we get rid of those private companies that are ripping off the public and harming their workers and clients there. We'll continue to work with tenants in the struggle that a number of people have talked about tonight. And we'll keep on keeping on. And I guess tomorrow we'll find out what's ever happened south of the border. So thanks very much, sisters and brothers, for being with us. We'll see you next month. Take care now.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Night.
Good night, everybody.
0149.
QP 4400. Good night, Miguel. Good night, Jackie. Whoops.
Mighty, mighty Opsu.
Way to go. I'm so proud of you. I heard about Glamorgan. Way to go.
And steel workers.
I
Awesome.
guess we can stop recording now.